G'day guys, Kieran here from KJH Woodworking and welcome back to the channel. We have this massive blank wall above our family room couch that we need to fill. We're gonna do some floating live edge shelves. So if you wanna see how we do that, stick around. Let's talk game plan. What we are gonna do is drill in a hole into the studs of this wall and then a hole into the back of our shelves. And then we're gonna thread into the wall a length of threaded rod, which is gonna protrude out about 120 mil, 130 mil, and then the shelf will sleeve over the top of those threaded rods. So what we're gonna do now is mark it out, then we're gonna make a jig so we can make sure we are getting a perfectly straight hole into those studs so that we can line them up when we drill them out on the drill press. I'm pretty fortunate because I have a laser level. Alternative is just using a standard level. I like to mark things out with painter's tape. Now you want to find the studs where you're going to screw into. You could use a stud finder, but I don't have one. Other technique is to tap along the wall and you should hear a distinct change in sound from when it goes from hollow to solid stud. Then take a thin nail and tap that in, marking either side of the stud. It doesn't matter if you make holes the whole way along because as long as you're in line with where your shelve's going to go, it's never going to be seen. So now we've got our first stud. In Australia, most of the time, your studs are either 600 center on center or 450 center on center. If it is a COLORBOND roof or a tin roof, try 600s first, or if it's a tiled roof, try 450s. If it's an internal non-load bearing wall, they're generally at 600s. So now I can just measure off that. I'll still double check with my nail and just make sure we've got all those studs. Okay, that setup is now done. As you can see, we have them marked along the walls. I've put some tape there just so we can visualize it. But now let's head into the workshop and let's build some shelves. We have managed to pick up these killer slabs from AIM Timber. If you are in Victoria or Australia, I highly recommend you check them out. I'll link their Instagram below, but their supply is fantastic. We've got these gorgeous Messmate slabs that we are going to mill up, sand, and finish to make some beautiful floating shelves. To start with, we're just gonna rough measure and rough cut everything using the jigsaw and track saw. Then we'll flatten everything down. My jigsaw blade was not long enough, so we had to improvise on the fly and revert to the track saw. This offcut will make a perfect charcuterie board at a later date. Future video. We're just gonna roughly mark center for the rough rip, and then we'll come back later once we've flattened everything to cut its final dimension. Like any project, I always remove the bark from the live edge, because that's the weakest point and will fail over time. Like this one wants to just come straight off. This edge is gonna require a little bit more work with the chisel to actually get that separation. But once it starts to separate, it generally pulls off pretty easily. After we flatten these top and bottom, we will clean the live edge up with some sanding. So if there's any little bits of bark left on, it's not the end of the world right now because we're gonna sand this all up with 80 grit sandpaper to smooth that all out before we start our finishing sanding. So I had a bit of a lapse in judgment back at home. I forgot my planer isn't working. I'm waiting on a part to come. So I have to go to a mate's shed to thickness these down. So we're gonna go ahead and surface these top and bottom. Thankfully, they are really flat, so I can do it all on the thicknesser. So we're just gonna pass that through, thickness it down to final thickness, then we'll take it back to our workshop and get cracking. That was incredibly tedious, but they look sensational. So they have come up an absolute treat. Cannot wait to get these crevices and cracks filled with black epoxy, and then we clean them up and oil them. Okay, we are back in our workshop now, and these milled up boards look sensational. They're absolutely gorgeous. Now we are gonna go ahead and cut them to final dimension, sand up the edges, and then fill everything with epoxy. So all of those imperfections, we're gonna use a black epoxy. So let's get stuck in. Okay, now that we've got that all cleaned up, we are on to what I consider the most important but worst task of any epoxy project, which is cleaning out all of the crevices, cracks, everything like that. So all of this in here we'll need to clean out, clear of any dust, debris, loose bark. To do that, I use a combination of tools. I use a wire wheel, small nail punch, small screwdriver, and a Dremel. So those three tools, and we'll get stuck in and we'll just use a variety of those to get them clean and clear. Take your time with this because this will mean that your epoxy adheres properly to the timber, because if it adheres to loose bark, that will eventually flake off. So take your time doing this. For the 4 shelves, I have realistically spent 6 hours. So take your time, do it properly, then you'll have a piece of furniture that lasts for years. We're gonna take some good quality packaging tape and cover the back side of the floating shelves, so when we fill the cracks and crevices with black epoxy, it's not going to seep through. You want to take your favorite black epoxy, mix that up, and then spread that through all of the cracks and crevices, ensuring that you're making sure you're filling everything across the surface, popping those bubbles with a blowtorch as you go. Once you've let that epoxy cure, you want to sand that back to flat timber before filling the opposite side. An alternative to using epoxy is using a builder's bog with a black oxide. It only really works if you're filling the cracks with black and if they are cosmetic cracks and voids rather than structural. In this case, we filled the top with the epoxy, and now we're going to fill the bottom and the edges with the builder's bog because it is considerably cheaper. So for 4 liters of bog, I pay around $60. For 4 liters of high quality epoxy, you're looking at about $150, roughly. The other benefits of this is it's dry in an hour, so you can get straight into continuing and sanding rather than having to wait 4 to 7 days for your epoxy to cure. So we're gonna take out your builder's bog, get yourself a bit more than you think you're gonna need, because you're gonna mix this in with the oxide, but not the hardener, so it's not gonna go off. You're only gonna mix it up in small amounts with the hardener. You add in your oxide, and you're just going to do it by eye until you get the color you're looking for. So once you've got a nice consistent black that you're happy with the color of, grab another board. So this is where you're going to take small amounts of that black, because you only want to mix in what you can use in about 5 minutes, because that's the working time of the bog. Now there's no right or wrong to how much hardener to use. You just sort of eyeball it. I would say we're going to go with that, because once you've added the hardener, it is going to go off. It just depends on how much hardener you add will change how long it takes to go off and how much working time you've got. So you just want to make sure all of that red is mixed through consistently. The other thing I like to do is make sure you scrape your scraper off and make sure you're mixing in that section as well. And from here, you've got about 5 minutes of working time, so get filling your crack. Make sure you do your sides. Now, the other benefit to this only taking an hour to dry is the fact that you can come back and refill if you've got any low spots. So I generally fill 2, maybe 3 times, depending on how fussy I am. And then we'll also do a black sanding sealer later on, which will go through, which will fill in any of the grain to make this super smooth. So stick around for that. Now, if you like this tip, I'd greatly appreciate you liking the video, as it helps the video spread to more people throughout the woodworking community. Once that's dry, you want to take your sander, sand it all back to the timber, and then repeat that process, filling in any low spots. You can see where you've got your low spots, because everywhere that's nicely filled goes this bluey gray, and then the low spots are the darker spots. Don't stress about the bluey gray. So when you apply your finish, it'll come up as a nice black consistency. Let's talk through how we are going to fix these shelves to the wall so we can conceal our fixings. So as you can see, I've laid out 3 of the shelves, and what they're going to sit on is a threaded rod. Got this long leg of threaded rod, which I've then gone ahead and cut into pieces nice and small, and then we will then thread these into the studs inside the wall so they are protruding out. We'll drill a hole corresponding on the backs of the shelves, and then these will just sleeve straight over those, holding them in place with no visible fixings. So to do that, I've gone ahead and I've just made myself a little jig. Basically what this block is to keep my drill bit square to that stud. All it is 3 bits of square MDF. So I cut them on a crosscut sled because I know that's going to be square. Then I've nailed them all together and put in a couple of spacing blocks just to hold it in place. So my drill bit, my extremely lengthy drill bit, will slide straight through there, penetrating that wall at a perfect 90-degree angle. So it'll be square from all directions. And then from there, we will use this threaded rod to cut in. So the hole we've drilled is a 10mm hole. We're using a 12mm threaded rod, which will then feed straight into those studs. I know this will work because it is a soft timber stud. And if you were to drill a hole to tap, you would drill a 10mm hole, then tap it for a 12mm bolt. Now the easiest way I found to get these threaded in is to simply put this 12mm rod into your drill and then drive it straight in. I've put some tape there because I know I only want to go into my stud 80mm because that's the distance of the hole I've drilled. So we'll drill that into the tape and then we're good to move on to the next one. Once you've fitted all your rods off, place your shelves in position and then mark the locations of each rod. Do that while it's in position because then you know you're gonna be bang on. If you take measurements, you might be slightly out. So I place it where I need it to go. I move it over 6 millimeters to the right because I'm using 12 millimeter bolts. So that means if I mark the right-hand side, I know that that is gonna be dead center of where I need it to be. So mark those, then we'll take them back to the shop. Okay, now we're gonna take a square and transfer the lines from the bottom of the board onto the back of the board so we can drill our holes on edge. If you wanna give it a really awesome finish, take some Ebony Timbermate wood filler, water it down to make a slurry, and then smear it over all faces of your shelves because that'll fill in the grain, make it super smooth and make that grain pop once you've oiled it. To get your live edge, use a glove and your hand and really rub it in there and then just spread it over with a scraper on all faces. When we sand those bad boys off, they are gonna look sensational. Now you are gonna see the beauty of the sanding sealer. By using this, once you sand the top surface off, you are left with a silky smooth, perfectly filled board where the grain has popped out and looks sensational. Once finish is on this board, it is gonna look amazing. Okay, let's talk through how we're drilling our holes. Yeah, we'll pretty much need a drill press as a definite and a table that you know is square to your drill bit. What we've done is made a fence so we've got something to clamp our live edge slab to because the slab's not actually going to be able to sit square to the table. So we've needed to make this fence, which is simply 4 bits of scrap that we've screwed together that we know is perfectly square. I'll link a video up above on how to make a crosscut sled because that is the tool that we use to get this as square as possible. And then we simply prop this up with some support and then we can drill our holes perfectly square straight through. So now let's get drilling. To finish off the holes, I just take my normal drill bit and go in the hole and use the hole to guide my drill bit. So I've set this to my depth, which is 120, and then we'll go the whole way in, then take a large countersink drill bit and just round over the edges of the hole. 2 reasons we do that. The first is it helps us to guide it onto the rods when we put it in place. And the second, if there's any burr around the plaster when we've screwed the rods in, that'll allow this to actually sit hard back against the wall. I like to give everything a quick wipe over with some turp before applying my favorite finishes, so the finish has the best opportunity to bind to the timber. My finishes of choice are Osmo Oil, Whittles Wax, or Rubio Monocoat. In this case, I'm gonna use Rubio Monocoat because that is what I have on hand. Okay, so Rubio Monocoat is a 2-part mix. I find it easiest to use a syringe to get your mix. So we're taking 3 parts of part A to 1 part of part B, mix and then apply. Only mix up what you need because this stuff does go off and it can't be reused. Best part about Rubio Monocoat is it's pretty much impossible to stuff up. All you do is spread it out using a ultra fine Scotch pad. I do not have an ultrafine Scotch pad today, so I am using a stock standard blue Scotch pad, which is just a non-scratch dish scourer. And fun fact, works just as well. Now you leave that soak in for a couple of minutes and then buff off with the terry cloth.
Okay, moment of truth, install time. We are gonna go ahead and take the shelves and thread them straight over the rods we installed earlier. And it is as simple as that.
I am absolutely stoked with how this project turned out. I'm really happy with the timber I chose, how the grain ended up popping with that black Timbermate, and the black bog worked brilliantly throughout the whole project. The finish is great. It is gonna look awesome for years to come. So thank you for sticking around for this video. If you want to see how we throw some awesome LED strip lighting into this to make it even more sensational, check out the video right here. Subscribe to the channel here. Otherwise, guys, I will catch you on the next one. Cheers, guys.